I'm a great believer, first of all, in architecture. I love architecture. And there's so many aspects of architecture. I mean, design being obviously the ultimate one in one sense, but I like the whole idea of a civil society there for cities. I like the idea of being having a responsibility beyond oneself. So it fits in all those things. And of course, I like designing with teams. I have fantastic partners and great teams. So for me, I'm about to be 80 and I am enjoying it as much today. In fact, more today. I often tell people I have enjoyed my last third of my life more than my first third of my life. And if I want to continue being an architect, I want to continue working.
Nous avions tous les deux commencé en construisant des abris. Et c'est parce que les abris sont très flexibles. Ce sont des structures souples. Vous pouvez mettre ce que vous voulez dedans. Ce sont des espaces fermés où l'activité peut être libre. Enfin, aussi libérée que possible des contraintes de la construction en dur. Voilà ce que sont les abris.
Pompidou, uno de los iconos más conocidos de la arquitectura high-tech, en el que el concepto es básicamente voltear el edificio desde dentro, dejando libre el espacio interior. Ubicado en Les Halles, un barrio medieval densamente poblado en la ciudad de París, se pretendía revitalizar esta zona deprimida económica y socialmente con el concurso para el centro cultural que gana el equipo de Renzo Piano, Gianfranco Francini y Richard ROGERS.
Hay un relato ahí maravilloso. Oye, mucho material distinto. Mucho material vidrio, distinto, madera, claro, fierro. Pero tiene una cosa fantástica porque tiene todos los elementos de la arquitectura moderna, del high-tech, porque él es de los representantes duros del high-tech, pero con estos volúmenes pesados adentro, al interior de esta transparencia. O sea, tiene una cosa muy una metáfora muy potente respecto de la justicia. Esta cosa robusta, pero muy transparente a la vez. Mírate la relación entre el antiguo y el moderno. Qué bueno este contrapunto que hace entre la liviandad del metal y el vidrio y estos volúmenes pesados de madera, oye. Por Dios, qué gente más capa para hacer arquitectura.
Building. It's distinctive, it's unique, it's instantly recognizable. I'm running out of neutral things to say about it. The new building was certainly radical. It's an example of a kind of architecture known by the unfortunate term Bowelism. meaning that the utilitarian aspects of the building, pipes, lifts, ducts, etc., are located on the outside to maximize the interior space and make maintenance and replacement easier. The Pompidou Centre in Paris is another example of this school of architecture, influenced by radical ideas of architects in the 1960s. Rogers and friends were particularly influenced by Archigram, a group who envisioned a machine-driven consumerist future of walking and floating cities. It's an interesting idea.
It was a massive job. One can absorb certain influences. One can see the light. There are certain regulations about how you build, things which will encourage you to change slightly your approach, but you don't absorb the whole. I think, yes, I think because of the light, mainly because of the light, it's very high in Madrid, the light is very clear, the weather is extremely different to British weather. I think, you know, it does both look different, and we have designed it subtly differently. It is possible to think of many colors, multicolors, more easily if you have good light. The side influences, you see the hills all the way around. The wavy roofs make some attempt to link those hills and take some of that spirit. But it's also a movement. I mean, the eye, try to catch the eye. The eye goes from piece to piece, the eye as you approach the building. So all the approach, all the side influences considerably.
The airport's design corresponds with its surroundings. Embedded in an artificial valley, the terminal mirrors the Spanish high plateau and flows organically across its roof into the hilly landscape. A functional structure, accommodating the aesthetic demands of the 21st century, but still remaining open for association.
Leadenhall office building, which is the tallest building in the city of London, is again a different animal. First of all, it's an office building, and that's, as I mentioned, tends to be very boring. One of the arts of architecture is not only to humanize, as I mentioned, but also how to use the constraints and in a way turn them upside down and see whether you can help you to design the building. The main constraints on Leadenhall was this. It was a view to St. Paul's. Now, London is unique in being partly controlled by views, so you have these big cuts, and you have to leave certain views open to St. Paul's, and we were on one of those views. The only way to build a tall building was to slope out of that. Now, you could step out of it, you could cut it shorter, and so on. So we made use of this, and we cut it back, cheese grater it's now called, at an angle. And that gives it that very prominent section and profile from all over London. It's been extremely difficult to work. I'm going to show you what I think is probably one of the lowest cost houses or buildings, dwellings that we've been involved in, and also perhaps the most expensive dwelling we've been involved with. This is a low-cost housing made out of basically wood, which can be built in 24 hours. The panels themselves are made in 24 hours in a factory, or can be made on site in a factory. And the house is erected in 24 hours. Kit of parts, and you can more or less select whatever design you like. The little red things are about energy collecting and and the collecting of wind and sun and so on. Let's see. This sort of gives you a quick. Now this is called it was a competition to build what was called then a £60,000 house for a competition which was run by the government, which we were one of the winners. But what's interesting is it's not that difficult to actually do it. It has high insulation. It has potentially the highest. It meets the highest energy conservation that we have in Britain. Actually, it's 6-star. We've already got up to 4-star, but it's only because the client doesn't want to go beyond it. Housing is a critical problem. I mean, in England we are so seriously short of housing that it's almost impossible in terms of cost for a single person to have a house. You have to have two people earning to be able to afford somewhere to live, especially if you're looking at anywhere which is centralized. That's it. Let's see what I can. Bogota is very fortunate in being in one of the most beautiful countries that I've ever been in. And Bogota itself is a city halfway up a mountain, a very tall mountain, so perched practically on a shelf. It could not be more exciting. It's certainly amongst the most beautiful cities I've ever visited, geographically and in a sense also about architecture.
We had the luxury of having a client that was very clear on what his priorities were. His priorities were to create a fantastic public space at the base of the building. He also wanted a good piece of architecture. He is an architect, he trained as an architect and therefore has a passion for architecture. But he never came and said, I want an icon. Actually, quite the reverse, he just said, I want a really good building. If a building becomes an icon, that's a privilege, that's a kind of extra. You know, what we aim to do is produce the best building for the needs of the client, but we also want to produce a building that contributes to the city. We very much believe that buildings have a responsibility to build a city. Each building should try and contribute a space. If in the process the public takes the building to its heart and gives it a name or something, that's a privilege. That's not something you can, I don't think that's something you can set out to do as an objective.
We don't build in an abstract way. We don't do a sketch and then we find the engineers and then we tell the client that that's what he's got. So we know we've got serious seismic problems here. We know we've got even wind problems and so on. So the building is specifically designed so it will withstand those things. Now that allows us to celebrate. We can actually go beyond just functionally putting up very heavy columns. We can use less material by creating diagonals which tie the buildings together and put some of the steel and concrete in tension, but specifically the steel, and that will save in the amount of steel. But also, of course, it gives you a scale. It gives you a scale, a grain, and a more human building. The rooftop, which is broken down into parts, again gives you a more human scale. So you start at the top, and it's really, that's quite a delicate, it's practically a jewel. We don't look at it as that, that's a functional element, but it does have a scale which is very important. And buildings are all about giving order through scale, through rhythm, through the play of light and shadow, and that has that whole lot.
We think public space is incredibly valuable in Bogota. There is not a great deal of open space, and the client really wanted us to make a really fantastic open space for the citizens of Bogota. So we felt what we should try and do is minimize the footprint of the building on the site and really let the public space run into and through the buildings. So that cutback really invites people to engage in the base of the building. It's almost the building is lifted up and the public realm floats around the base. What that incidentally created was something which is very interesting scale-wise. I think you get this fantastic, very human scale spaces at the top and the bottom of the building, but you also, it creates a datum at the base here, which pretty much relates to the typical datum for the adjoining areas of Bogota, which are about 8 stories. So you've almost can describe it as a building, low-rise building, which engages the public. You've then got the business end of the building, as it were, and at the top again it celebrates with a series of terraces, and it is planned that one of those terraces will be a new observatory for the city. So people will have access to the top and the bottom.
There is a connection, but it's a subtle connection between the mountains and the design. You don't go there, I think, and say, we will make a small mountain out of buildings, because they're totally different. It's a dialogue between the architecture, which is the man-made, and nature, and that in itself is very interesting. And we have broken up the building and the skyline specifically, which is what the mountain really affects. It is broken down in such a way, in a sort of circular way, that you don't see it as a lump against the mountain. You see it as a series of roofs, practically of towers and turrets.